the size of Europe. The vast emptiness of Arabia was sandwiched between two of the ancient world's great powers. To the north was Christian Byzantium, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople. To the east was another ancient civilization, the Sassanids, the remains of the great Persian Empire. In between were hundreds of Arab tribes and clans, constantly competing in a battle for supremacy and survival. There were very few cities. One of them was Mecca, the city where Muhammad was born. Muhammad is believed to have been born on a spot close to here in the year 570. His father Abdullah died before he was born, and his mother Amina was very poor. And what's really interesting is at the time there was no sense of the coming of a Messiah. There was no stars in the sky, and wise men didn't travel from afar in order to worship him. In fact, at the time, barely anyone noticed and no one really cared. And yet today, there isn't anything to mark where Muhammad was born. No shrine, no museum, not even a plaque on a wall. Most Muslims make a clear distinction between the messenger and the message. Muhammad may be held in high esteem, but to worship him is considered shirk, a heinous and unforgivable corruption of Islam. So, over the years, many sites connected with Muhammad and his life have been removed to ensure there is no worship of anyone other than God. The same goes for visual depictions of Muhammad. Unlike in Christian churches with their myriad images of Jesus on the cross and the Virgin Mary, mosques have no images of Muhammad or any other person at all.
What is very important in the Islamic tradition is to understand the very essence of the Islamic monotheism, what we call Tawheed in Arabic, the oneness of God. He's beyond everything and we don't represent God. But in order to be quite clear in this relationship with God, we never represent or have an image of any of the prophets. So it's not only the last prophet, Muhammad, it's all the prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, are not seen and drawn and anything like this in Islam. It's out of respect towards this oneness of God and following a messenger, never worshipping him.
In the past, some Ottoman and Persian miniature paintings have depicted Muhammad, but his face was always hidden behind a veil. But in the West, there is a long history of depicting Muhammad in drawings and paintings. Most recently, a Danish cartoon portrayed him as a terrorist with a bomb in his turban. This led to an explosion of anger and protest right across the Muslim world, not just because it was showing Muhammad's face, but also because it was ridiculing him too. Despite the lack of visual imagery, the written sources for Muhammad's life are extensive. The first is the Quran itself, Islam's holy book. But there is also a rich library of stories and sayings connected to Muhammad, preserved and written down after his death, and known as the Hadith. Muslim scholars had to sift through thousands of sayings and stories about Muhammad to check their validity.
Muslim scholars themselves were terribly worried to try and verify whether the hadith they were collecting were true, whether they were false, whether they were fabricated.
The problem that scholars have with it is, one, it's only set down in writing at a much later time. The actual earliest physical texts that we can hold are actually only from the 820s. And Muhammad dies in 632, so that's a long period. Obviously, yes, of course, they've been transmitted over time, but with transmission orally over time, problems can come in.
The Arabs relied on their memory throughout history. Their history and their genealogy were all retained by memory, handed down. Muhammad was a very important man. By the time he died, he had hundreds of thousands of people following him or some opposing him. And they all said and preserved all this. And that is a source which cannot be ignored simply because some people say, no, this is just an invention, or that it was written later. It wasn't.
While the veracity of the hadiths is still debated and argued over, there are remarkably accounts of Muhammad's